The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing-for-the-fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at this very special Guardian Live event to interview Naomi Klein. My name is Katharine Viner. I'm Editor-in-Chief of The Guardian, and what a wonderful room full of Guardian readers we have gathered here today. The Guardian is absolutely committed to reporting on the environment. For more than a decade, we've had a team of specialist reporters on the subject, and in recent years have grown that team in Britain, in the US, in Australia, and around the world. We break stories, we give you the information you need, and we never, ever doubt the science. In the last few days, you will have seen our major series, The Polluters, in which we named and shamed the biggest polluting companies, financial firms, and individuals, and reminded people that the climate crisis is not a random act of God, but there are people to blame. We're inspired to do this work by you, our readers. We know how committed you are to this issue, and we know that together we can build a hopeful future. Our guest today is one of the world's great thinkers. Naomi Klein burst onto the scene in 1999 with her stunning work, No Logo, about the human and ecological costs of corporate globalization. At the time, Naomi was labelled the prophet of the new politics by The Guardian, and we've been dazzled by her work ever since. Her book, The Shock Doctrine, brilliantly revealed how disaster capitalists swoop in on communities destroyed by natural disasters or war in order to exploit them for their own profits. This Changes Everything, her next book, argued that true action on the climate is impossible unless extreme neoliberal economics is rejected, and it was truly ahead of its time. Meanwhile, Naomi's 2017 book, No Is Not Enough, is a tour de force about Donald Trump, which examined the US president through the prisms of corporate branding, shock, climate denialism, and extreme capitalism, thus bringing together threads from 20 years of her work. Naomi has collaborated on films with Alfonso Cuarón and Michael Winterbottom. She's the winner of the Sydney Peace Prize, and her exciting new book, On Fire, about which we'll be talking tonight, is a stunning addition to an already great body of work, and it will surely inspire governments around the world to adopt a Green New Deal. As Greta Thunberg says, Naomi Klein's work has always moved and guided me. She is the great chronicler of our age of climate emergency, an inspirer of generations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to Guardian Live, Naomi Klein.
Hi. How's everybody? Feeling fiery? I hope so. I'm so happy to be here, and I want to thank everybody at The Guardian who made this beautiful event happen, everybody at my publisher, Penguin Random House, who have been with me since the shock doctrine. I'm so grateful for all the support. Are there any climate activists in the crowd? Do we have any climate strikers? Yeah? Good. How about any Extinction Rebels in the crowd? Yes. Yes. Any fossil fuel divestors in the crowd? Good. All right. Good, good, good. Kath, I want to thank you for that wonderful introduction. A little known fact, Kath said, since the Guardian called me prophet of the new politics, it was actually a young Katharine Viner who, when No Logo first came out 20 years ago, Kath wrote the first major profile of me and put me on the cover of The Guardian magazine, and it really changed my life. So I am so delighted to be here with you. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation and to the questions that you sent in advance, which are really stimulating. So I'm not going to take too much time. I just want to give a little lay of the land, if that's okay. And it's interesting to be here talking about the kind of transformative change that our moment requires. Because I have been making this argument for some time now, and it's interesting to notice the changes in reaction, particularly from the media class. When I published This Changes Everything in 2014, a lot of the response that I got from mainstream journalists was just denial. Not denying the reality of climate change, though there's always a little bit of that, right? But a denial that the climate crisis demanded the scale of change that I was arguing. And a lot of people were saying, surely capitalism can do this. Why are you making it harder? You know, capitalism we can have cap and trade, we can have carbon taxes. Why does it have to be about capitalism, right? And what I've really noticed with this book is that we seem to have skipped straight from denial to doom, right? And so there really are very few people out there these days who will make the argument, actually, that our current economic system is capable of the kind of change that scientists are telling us is required to safeguard a habitable future. And so most of what I get attacked for these days is just having hope. Like, why are you so hopeful? What is wrong with you, right? And I find that really strange because I feel a lot of things. You know, I feel terror at what lies ahead. I feel so much grief for what we have already lost so needlessly and what the loss that is already locked in. So hold on, I'm just going to grab a little water. I feel rage at those who knew and lied and continue to lie, to lock in a future that is a crime against humanity and a crimes against the web of life. It was preventable. But I do feel some hope. I feel some hope because there is a pathway, and it isn't easy. It isn't easy. But a year ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with that now fateful report about keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees, keeping warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And they strongly recommended that we try to do that, given the kind of disruption we're seeing with 1 degree Celsius of warming. They said that it is technically possible to do this, but it will require massive change. And the summary of that report, they said that we would need to cut global emissions in half in 12 years. That's 11 years now. And they said doing so requires unprecedented transformation in every aspect of society. Changing everything, in other words, right? So we have this very short window in which it is technically possible to cut global emissions in half, and in countries like the UK and the US that have been emitting carbon on an industrial scale for a couple of hundred years, we need to do it a lot faster. It is possible to do, it is tremendously hard. And if every inch of our collective energy was focused on that transformation, it would truly be an epic task. But that's not actually what we are doing. In fact, what is happening is that the men rising to the highest, most powerful positions in their respective lands, in country after country, are not dousing the flames of those planetary fires. They are, in fact, planetary arsonists, determined, it would seem, to torch the planet with glee. I live in the land of Donald Trump. Sorry, I have a catch in my throat, and I'm having a bit of a Theresa May sort of freak out here. So, so anybody who just wants to give me a lozenge just in case, I would feel a lot better about that. So I'm not going to lay out all of the things that Donald Trump is doing to torch the planet, but rest assured that there is not an environmental regulation that he is not attempting to dismantle. He is doing it all. Thank you. He is cracking open every piece of public land that he possibly can to new oil and gas drilling. He is trolling Greta Thunberg on Twitter. He is ogling Greenland, all of that. Of course, here in the UK, don't feel smug, and I know you don't these days. According to the Guardian's excellent pollution project, Boris Johnson has the worst possible voting record when it comes to climate. So he may say nice things about fluffy animals once in a while. Do not believe him, not that you would. In Brazil, we have Jair Bolsonaro, who should not be president of Brazil. Lula da Silva should be president of Brazil, who's locked up. I mean, actually, come to think of it, none of these people were really elected by majorities. But anyway, but Lula da Silva, the most popular politician in Brazil, every poll showed that he would have won the election. He was locked up so that he was not able to run in an incredibly corrupt judicial process that we now know because of leaked texts. There was collusion between the prosecutor and the judge in that case, who then became the justice minister. So Bolsonaro wins the election, promising to attack indigenous rights, to open up the Amazon to unrestricted resource extraction, to open it up to cattle farming and soy farming, to replace this incredible wilderness on which so much of the world depends. And of course, he stood before the UN a couple of weeks ago and told them that the Amazon is not actually on fire at all. It's just all of our imagination. In Australia, you have Scott Morrison, who famously showed up at Parliament with a big hunk of coal and declared it good for humanity, and explained that that was why they intended to dig the world's largest coal mine. And in so many countries, you have these strongmen figures in the highest office. Too many for me to list here, but of course Modi, Duterte, Erdogan, and on and on. And there is, in every national context, there is difference. These aren't cookie-cutter situations, but we can identify some common threads that many of these strongmen figures are using to elevate themselves. There is often a very sharply defined in-group, an in-group in these countries who are designated the real citizens of the countries, right? Worthy of protection. And then there are various out-groups within the country and outside trying to get in. So these are the criminals, the exiled, the illegitimate, the illegal, the criminals, the terrorists, the invaders. And all of this supposedly makes it acceptable to wage war on them, to incarcerate them, and to vilify them. So we have these two fires raging right now. We have the literal fires of the climate crisis, including literal wildfires, but also the supercharged storms and drought and flooding, all linked to climate disruption. But we also have these political fires, these fires of hate that are also beginning to rage out of control, where the flames are also seemingly jumping from country to country. And what I'm arguing in this book is that it isn't a coincidence that these two fires are raging at the same time. That in this moment, when we are now not talking about climate change as this future threat, this something to worry about for our grandchildren, but is banging down the doors, we are in it. That in this moment, we have this epidemic of strong-armed leaders around the world who are tapping into this feeling of profound unease. And of course, much of the unease has to do with 4 decades of neoliberal globalization that has hurt so many people. See, just holding this makes me feel better. Isn't that weird? I don't actually have to put it in my mouth. They're tapping into the insecurity that this economic model has spread throughout the world, and the fact that standards of living have been attacked, and they are also tapping into the fact that we all know, whether we admit that we know it or not, that our collective home is in crisis. And that is creating feelings of terror. As I mentioned earlier, I feel it. I'm sure many of you feel it. I think we all feel that. And what their gift is, what they understand, is how to harness that feeling of vulnerability, of precarity, of economic precarity and ecological precarity, and to turn people against each other, right? Riling up the hatred, and building walls, and horrific concentration camps, and weaponizing human desperation so that everybody is attacking each other, and they are attacking the press and liberties. And all of this leaves them free to get on with the real business at hand, which is plundering the last protected wilderness on this planet from the Amazon to the Arctic, which of course fuels those planetary fires, the droughts and the superstorms and the floods, the fires that force millions to flee their arid lands, and the fires that also intensify armed conflicts, which also fuels more migration, which in turn is used to fuel the fires of hate. We have a conflagration on our hands. And I just want to read to you a very short passage from the introduction of On Fire. The rapidly escalating cruelty of our present moment cannot be overstated, nor can the long-term damage to the collective psyche should this go unchallenged. Beneath the theater of some governments denying climate change and others claiming to be doing something about it, While they fortress their borders from its effects, there is one overarching question facing us. In the rough and rocky future that has already begun, what kind of people are we going to be? Will we share what's left and look after one another? Or are we going to attempt to hoard what's left, look after our own, and lock everyone else out? In this time of rising seas and rising fascism, these are the stark choices before us. There are options besides full-blown climate barbarism, but given how far down that road we are, there is no point pretending that they are easy. It's going to take a lot more than a carbon tax or cap and trade. It's going to take an all-out war on pollution and poverty and racism and colonialism and despair all at the same time. So I feel the weight of our historical moment. I feel it every minute of the day. But here is why I do still have hope. I commit the sin of hope. And I don't only have terror and grief and rage. And listen closely, because I think this is important. I don't think we live in a time of just two fires, those climate fires and those fires of hate. I believe that we live in a time of three fires. There is a third fire that is beginning to rage, and it is our fire. I need you to believe that. These are the fires of the youth climate strikers, who just a couple of weeks ago had 7 million people walking out of their schools and their workplaces, by far the largest climate mobilization in the history of this planet. And it happened, it emerged in a little more than a year. And ours are the fires of Extinction Rebellion. This movement that has redrawn the political map and has said to so many people who felt so isolated, alone, staring at their screens, going, am I the only one who thinks maybe we should be talking a little bit about the fact that we have lost Arctic sea ice and not just talk about Brexit? And an opening was created where people realized, no, you're not alone. There are so many people who share that sense of real emergency, and created a space where people could come together and raise that collective alarm, sound that emergency from below, to grieve together, to plan together, to strategize together. And I want to say to the forces in this city that are treating them like criminals, Extinction Rebellion are not the criminals. They are trying to stop a crime in progress. The criminals are the fossil fuel companies and the banks and the hedge funds who finance them. The fossil fuel companies who, now we know thanks to The Guardian's excellent Polluters Project reporting, Shell and Exxon fully plan and are telling their investors that they are going to expand fossil fuel production by 35% between now and 2030. Now in 2030, now 2030 is when I just said the IPCC told us we need to have cut global emissions in half. Those are the criminals. Those are the criminals. Ours are the fires of the indigenous rights movements around the world, putting their bodies on the line to protect rainforests in Brazil, to stop oil pipelines all over the Americas, to stop fracking. Ours are the fires of the fossil fuel divestment movement, which has won many victories in the UK, and just in the US won a huge victory. It got the University of California system to divest their $80 billion portfolio from fossil fuels. We are winning a lot of victories. And ours are also the fires of the climate justice movement. These are frontline communities with the dirtiest industries in their backyards, whose kids are bearing the toxic burden of our collective addiction to fossil fuels, overwhelmingly communities of color. These are the communities that did the intellectual work that created the context for the Green New Deal, because they pioneered the concept of climate justice, which tells us that as we transform our economies to get off fossil fuels, we need to transform our economies to make them fairer on every single level. And why wouldn't we do it? We have a moment here, and the reason I called the book On Fire is because that is what we need to be. If you thought that the future that we showed in that video looked nice, it's not going to happen if we're sort of in favor of it. It's going to happen if we are on fire for it. This idea of fire I've thought a lot about, obviously. And fire can be an incredibly destructive force. It's an incredibly destructive force right now in the Amazon. I was recently in Paradise, California, which is a community that was completely razed by the largest wildfire about a year ago in California's history. 14,000 buildings destroyed, about 80 people killed. But the fire that I'm talking about, our fire, this is not the fire of destruction and annihilation. Fire is also a creative force. Fire is also a natural force that clears away debris in forests to make room for new growth, to create more fertile soil. And that is the fire that we need to locate, because we have a lot of debris that we need to clear away so that we can rise to this historical moment that we happen to live in. We happen to be alive in 2019 at the last possible moment when we could turn things around. We may not have hoped for it, but that is the moment when we are alive. And we have to figure out how to rise to it, which means we have to figure out what is the debris that we need to clear away. I don't know you. I don't know what your debris is. Maybe you're carrying around some trauma that is keeping you from being fully in this moment and joining this movement. Maybe it's internal work that you need to do. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you have invested a whole lot in being a very, very serious person who sort of splits the difference and doesn't get excited about anything, Keep calm and carry on. Maybe you need to clear away some of that debris and find a fire, the fire of survival, that will allow you to fight in this moment, to fight for life, because that's what we need. So we need to figure out whatever it is that is stopping us inside, because we have a hell of a lot of debris to clear away on the outside. And we need fires in our movements coming together that burn bright and hot enough to clear away the debris of the deniers, funded by fossil fuel companies who are still out there lying and spreading misinformation so that people are confused. We need to clear away that debris. We need fires that burn bright enough to clear away the debris of the distractors, right? Who are constantly telling us that we should focus on pretty much anything other than this existential emergency, that maybe it's Trump's tweets, maybe it's always Brexit, maybe it's some hilarious new, viral video, whatever it is. We need to clear away the debris of the distractors. And we also need to clear away the debris of the doomers, the people telling us that it's all too late and we're too selfish anyway and we'll never do it, so we may as well just give up, which is an extremely privileged position that you can only have if you happen to think that you are going to be all right. And most of all, we need to clear away the debris of the dividers, who are so good at turning us against one another when we need to be more united, more powerful than we have ever been before. And I just want to leave you with a quote that I really love, that I read in The Guardian, actually, from the UK climate strikers from last March. And they wrote a piece, and it said, Greta was the spark, but we are the wildfire, and that's what we all need to be. We need to be the wildfire. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for that inspiring talk and introduction to your fantastic book. I think everyone's got a copy, which is great. I just wondered from what you were talking then, I wonder what debris you had cleared away to find your fire.
I mean, I don't know how personal we want to get. Lots of debris, but I think, you know, for this book and thinking about climate, some of the debris I had to clear away was sort of some ideas I realized I had absorbed about, you know, what you have to be as a woman to be taken seriously. And I think because, you know, like my first book, No Logo, and then the Shock Doctrine, you know, these were books about economics, and I would often find myself in arguments overwhelmingly with men in situations where I was the only woman. And so I think that I cultivated a sort of way of communicating that was really very controlled and calm. And yeah, I was saying like radical things about capitalism, but I was very calm. And one of the things that I've realized about the moment that we're in is that part of why people are confused is that it actually doesn't make sense to tell people that we are in a crisis as profound as we are in and be really, really chill about it, you know? It's confusing. Like, if it really is as bad as we are saying, then why doesn't our affect match that, right? And so I think, yeah, some of the debris I've been clearing away is like the debris of having learned how to be a woman in public, which requires a kind of a tamping down of emotion, because we always get slagged for being emotional. And I think, and coming to a place of realizing I actually don't care what those people think of me. What I care about is being able to reach people who are struggling with their own emotions and needing to see other people feeling strong emotions as well, because we're social beings, and I think that we need to see what we're feeling reflected in others, to believe that it's legitimate to feel it ourselves. So yeah, that's some of the that's just a taste of some of the debris. I've got lots of debris, but I'm working on it, you know, because I do feel that anybody with a platform in this moment has to be using it to its full capacity. And I don't just mean people who happen to be, you know, in the climate box, as I sort of have been for the past decade, but anybody with a platform right now has a moral responsibility to use that platform to meet this emergency.
I mean, I've noticed in your writing, and there's a brilliant essay that's reproduced in here from 2010 about the Gulf oil spill called A Hole in the World, where you talk about the kind of oil pumping out of the bottom of the earth and sort of like almost like a bleeding wound, and that's destruction. It seemed to be, it's an incredibly emotional essay, and do you feel that you've got more emotionally involved with the kind of natural world as part of your work?
Yeah, I have, and I mean, I'm a city person. I grew up in cities. I think, like a lot of urban people, I felt kind of intimidated by nature writing. I didn't know enough names of birds. I felt, you know, this wasn't my thing. And I think I hadn't spent enough time in nature to feel like I could legitimately access that or write about it in that way. But I think what changed for me is I actually left the city for a while. When I wrote The Shock Doctrine, I actually wrote it in a really remote part of British Columbia, which is where my family's from, on the west coast of Canada. And I needed to isolate myself to write that book, just because my life was nutty and I just needed to be physically very far away in order to just discipline myself to write it. But what I found was that because the Shock Doctrine is about such a disturbing material, it deals with torture and the worst that human beings are capable of doing to each other, being in nature was like saved me, like having the ability to take a break from that and go for a walk in an old-growth forest was just really allowed me to do that work, because I wrote The Shock Doctrine, with a clenched fist. It's not an uplifting book, those of you who are familiar with it. And so I think that connected me in a way that I had never been to a place. And it's a precarious place. BC is, you have a forest and ocean ecosystem that is really dependent on this one amazing fish. The Pacific salmon, feeds, they're just this incredible fish that goes from, fresh water down to salt water and then up again. And along the way, supports ancient indigenous cultures, feeds the orca whales, the otters, the seals, the eagles, goes upstream, feeds the forest. Those amazing trees are fed with salmon because the bears eat them and drag them into the forest. And realizing we'll probably lose the salmon. We're probably going to lose the salmon. That's that's a really devastating thing. And so I think just letting myself fall in love with the place, get to know it, and then realizing, oh my Lord.
What's the prognosis for the salmon?
The salmon don't like warm water. There are a lot of forces that, the poor salmon have been under siege on a lot of fronts. There were dams built that they couldn't get over, and then we took down the dams, and there was debris in the streams, so they couldn't get upstream. So we had programs to clear the debris, and there are fish farms. Farmed salmon, don't eat it. So fish, Atlantic salmon are farmed in Pacific waters, and they escape and they spread disease, and so these are all forces that you could close down the fish farms, you could clear the streams, you could take down the dams, but the one thing we can't do is turn down the temperature of the ocean, and it turns out that they're not adapting well to warmer oceans and rivers. So we had a very weak run this year, and it's really frightening. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that was the big difference, was living there. I lived there for 3 years, and just falling in love with the place, letting it break my heart open, and thinking about what it would be like to lose huge parts of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's a practical question, that this fantastic video that you made with Molly Crabapple and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Is a Green New Deal a real possibility in the US, and how?
Yeah. Right.
And in the UK, actually. Tell us about the UK.
Yeah. So it is, yes and yes, it is. If we are on fire for it, like I was saying, not going to be easy, up against some incredibly powerful forces. But I think the significance of the Green New Deal is that really, for the first time, we're talking about transformations on the scale of the crisis itself. Because for so long, we have had this mismatch. I was talking about an emotional mismatch. But there's also a mismatch of we're facing an existential crisis. Let's see if we can create, a market in pollution, or change your light bulbs, or whatever the incremental response has been. The Green New Deal is... It's a system upgrade for the economy. It is a vision for the next economy. And so the history in the US is the Democrats won the midterm elections in 2016. They took back Congress. And in that election, there were several insurgent candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and members of the Squad, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Anna Presley. Many of them challenged establishment Democrat incumbents in order to win. And so after the elections, but before they'd even been sworn in, before the new Congress had been sworn in, the leadership of the Democratic Party was feeling very good about themselves. They just pulled off this amazing electoral feat. And instead of congratulating them, this scrappy young activist group, the Sunrise Movement, taking its name from the ball of life-giving fire in the sky, occupied Nancy Pelosi's office, the most powerful Democrat in Washington, and demanded a Green New Deal. And the game changer was that not just that they occupied her office, but that they were supported by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who visited them, which was very controversial, this like freshman, youngest woman ever elected to Congress, and she's visiting the kids who have occupied, the leader-to-be's office, and it was a scandal, right? But as AOC is a gifted communicator, and Sunrise was, amplified this idea, and people started liking it a lot. It started polling really well, and pretty soon, the majority of the candidates who are now vying to lead the Democratic Party, the majority of the frontrunners, have felt the need to endorse the Green New Deal, to say this is part of what they're running on. Now, we can talk probably, if this audience is less interested in whose platform, how they all compare, and so on. I would say the two candidates who are most serious about it are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And if one of them wins the primary, and then if they win the general election, yeah, we could have a Green New Deal. But we will still need a hugely mobilized population pushing for it. And that's what's interesting about invoking the original New Deal, Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s. There's lots to be inspired by. There's lots to be warned about because there was discrimination in the original New Deal. Particularly in the US South, but many workers were not included in the original New Deal. Got Social Security, unemployment insurance, it broke up the banks, it directly employed more than 10 million people, it electrified rural America, it planted 2.3 billion trees, it transformed the country. There was also a renaissance in public funding for the arts through the New Deal. But certain workers were excluded, including agricultural workers and domestic workers, who were overwhelmingly black, and they were sacrificed to get this through. They were sold out, frankly, by their fellow workers, by white workers. So this is why in the text of the Green New Deal resolution that AOC and Senator Ed Markey drafted, it's very clear about how not to repeat those exclusions. There are things that should be in the New Deal that aren't. There's nothing on migration in the New Deal resolution. There's not nearly enough about international financing. But Bernie Sanders' campaign has $200 billion for international financing, a transfer of wealth from north to south, for countries that are on the front lines of climate change, did next to nothing to create this crisis. So money for adaptation and money to leapfrog over fossil fuels and go to green tech. But we also need to talk about migrant rights. We also need to talk about what we owe to people who can't stay on their lands because they've simply become too arid, or for other reasons. And there really needs to be a transformation in how we approach migration. And this is a big missing piece from a lot of the way people are talking about the Green New Deal. So in the UK, there's a coalition that's called Labour for a Green New Deal, who've been pushing really hard. And the Labour Party, at this past Labour Party conference, there's some really great language that was adopted about decarbonization by 2030, which is what we need to do. Labour is prioritizing public ownership over renewable energy, so that we have energy democracy. So we're not just switching from one concentrated industry to another concentrated industry. That as we transition, we can also have many, many more people reap the economic benefits of these new energy sources, use the money to fund services in communities and so on. So I think we're starting to see a lot of movement within the Labour Party for a real Green New Deal. There's a debate now about whether to call it a Green New Deal or the Green Industrial Revolution. I'm not going to weigh in on that right now. And although I have to say that I like Green New Deal better. And this comes back to what I was saying about the need to have a mobilized population. The Green New Deal was not just an elite project. It was not just the government handing down these policies to desperate people. It was the result of a an incredibly mobilized working class that was having general strikes, shutting down cities and ports, demanding more and more and more improvements to the New Deal. And so, but I realize that it's an American reference, but I guess the part about and certainly the Industrial Revolution was, trade unions revolutionized it. But I think that whatever we call it, it has to be clear that this is going to be, it's going to come out of this push and pull of outside inside. It isn't just going to be like elect the right people, wait for it to happen.
It's not going to just emerge.
No.
That makes me think of there's a nice bit in your book about the way the environment movement is often sort of used. People say that people using the climate crisis, people like you using the climate crisis to advocate a socialist agenda, and this is just all cover for socialism at last. You've got.
Yeah.
Did you want to?
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
this is that it's. The watermelon theory, right? Red on the outside, green on the outside, red on the inside. The fact is, it's not a coincidence that the climate change denial movement is a product of right-wing think tanks. In this country, in the United States, in Australia, these sort of so-called free market think tanks that have been successfully, largely, advocating for a very radical kind of capitalism of deregulation and privatization and endless austerity. It really is incompatible with those, responding to climate change is completely incompatible with those policies. We need huge investments in the public sphere. As labor is arguing, if we want to guarantee access to public transit, we're going to have to reverse the privatizations, and so that we actually have power over the rails again. Same thing for electricity. We've lost the levers of power in the key sectors because of the success of that neoliberal project. Now, so many of the sectors that are at the heart of the climate crisis are in the hands of private companies that are only interested in profit, and they block us at every turn. So the truth is that we do need to do a lot of the things that the left has been arguing for a long time, but the climate crisis is also a challenge to the left, to large parts of the left that have been having more of a argument about the redistributing the spoils of endless extraction, let's just say, right? There are large parts of the left that have not reckoned with the planetary limits, and have worthy goals about redistributing oil revenue, redistributing mining revenue. And it's better than not redistributing it, but it's not actually a solution to the climate crisis. And I think this is part of why it has taken traditional left parties a long time to actually get to the point where we finally are now, where we are starting to see the scale of policies that we need, and the kind of transformation we need, because they were really, really heavily invested in an industrialist, extractivist model that wasn't able to imagine the kinds of transformations that we need. But the truth is that, when I think about the work that I did 20 years ago, writing No Logo, and that was focused more on the labor and local environmental impacts of this brutal economic system. And what we were told back then was, well, sure, it's brutal, but eventually, once we get everybody in this global system, it's the wealth is going to trickle down, and everybody's going to benefit. And what's actually happened is that the misery of that model has trickled up and has now swallowed our entire planet. So I don't see these issues as unrelated. I freely admit that I see a connection between an economic system that treats people like trash and treats the planet like trash. I think it's the same logic.
There's another challenging bit in your book about the Christchurch gunman. This is the man who killed 51 Muslims at prayer in a mosque in Christchurch in New Zealand, who described himself as an enviro-fascist, that it was a kind of twisted kind of environmentalism that he espoused. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think people remember this horrific crime, and what I write about in the book is that one of the terrible, I don't know what to call it, it's not an irony, but that terrorist attack happened on the same day as the first global climate strike, on March 15th. So in New Zealand, and I spoke to some of the people involved, they were in the middle of their strike. So they had walked out of school, and they had gathered in this plaza in downtown Christchurch, and they were giving speeches, and it was a very festive atmosphere. And then they were suddenly told that they had to disperse, and a police came on stage and said everybody has to leave. They didn't know what was happening, but what was actually happening is that a few miles away, this killer, whose name we aren't using, had gone to 2 mosques. He was I think about a 7-minute drive away at that point, and had opened fire on Muslims at prayer, and stole the lives of more than 50 people. And he published this manifesto describing himself as an ethno-nationalist eco-fascist, and was linking immigration to environmental destruction. Then a couple months later, there was another one of these hate crimes in the United States. A man who was inspired by the Christchurch killer, and he said this in his manifesto, went to a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, and opened fire on Mexicans who were shopping at Walmart. And he was even more explicit in linking it with climate, because he said that he knows that the American way of life is unsustainable at a global level. And he also knows that Americans are not going to change their way of life. And that is why he chose a Walmart where Mexicans shop. Basically, to say to those Mexicans, you are not allowed to shop like we do. Like, we're going to hoard this lifestyle for ourselves. And it's a literal expression, in a way, of what is happening on our borders, where our governments are fortressing themselves, building networks of camps, a model that in many ways was pioneered in Australia, the idea of trying to keep migrants from ever reaching our countries, and then privatizing and profiting. And this relates to some of the stuff I wrote about in the shock doctrine. You can profit from this model. There's money to be made, not just in the extracting of the last fossil fuels, but also in the incarceration of migrants. It's a for-profit business, and this is what Australia pioneered on Nauru and Manus, where they went to, desperately poor countries. Nauru is particularly heartbreaking because they're very vulnerable to climate change, and said, well, here's a new revenue stream for you. You can be the jailers of today's migrants, knowing full well that they are tomorrow's migrants. And that model has been adopted by the European Union with the outsourcing to the Libyan so-called Coast Guard, when they're actually a bunch of warlords, and the criminalizing of humanitarian boats and rescue, and the camps in Libya. And now Trump, what he's doing right now in Central America is, after cutting hundreds of millions of dollars of aid to Central America, including aid that was going to farmers who were facing drought to try to help them stay on their lands, he's now going to these same countries who he just cut that aid from and saying, we have a new revenue stream for you. You can jail our migrants, and have our for-profit prisons. So this is, I call it climate barbarism. obviously not all migration is because of climate change. It is one of the drivers of migration. It's also, it is an accelerant to conflict. Many people are migrating for reasons that have nothing to do with climate change. But all of these leaders know, whether they deny climate change or not, they all know it is happening, including Donald Trump, who I think had to change his golf course in Scotland, or one of his golf courses, because of sea level rise. He knows that climate change is real. They all believe that their wealth will protect them.
Yeah. They can buy their way out of it.
Right, and we're seeing this phenomenon of these like super rich survivalists, right, who are buying land in New Zealand or various other places that have been deemed to be the most safe from climate disruption. And so, we have this sort of micro-fortressing, or this sort of taking it to the absurd levels of the Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who are like, let's build space colonies, that's our escape hatch. And we're not all invited, by the way, to the space colonies. But this is also what is happening on our borders. And as I was saying before, I think these leaders are tapping into this fear. And, what I'm really worried about, frankly, is for a long time, there used to be this, what are we going to do about the climate change deniers, right? What are you going to do about your, racist uncle who watches Fox News and denies the reality of climate change? And my thing lately is, I'd almost rather he deny climate change, because what really scares me, is what happens when that racist Fox News brain-addled, racist.
You keep saying racist.
Sorry, but it's not like when they stop denying climate change that they suddenly are like, let's sign the Paris Accord, and pay our climate debts. No, what's happening is that there is a younger generation now, and the polls are showing this, where younger people on the right in the United States know climate change is happening. They don't deny it as much as their parents, but they don't have a progressive response to it. Their response is even scarier. It's going to make us nostalgic for climate change deniers, because their response is we need to protect our own. This is why I really don't think it is a coincidence that we are seeing this surging of overt white supremacy. It never went away. It was always latent. But what we need to understand about these ideas about ranking human life is that they emerged because they were useful, right? So-called scientific racism emerged to rationalize the transatlantic slave trade, to rationalize colonial land theft. You needed a hierarchy of humanity that said, well, those people aren't real people, or at least not like us, and that makes this barbarism okay. So now we live in a time where we are allowing thousands of people to die in the Mediterranean, where we are building this archipelago of these concentration camps. And what is going to make this okay? What will make it okay is the same thing that justified those previous barbaric stages of this economic model. Not to say they ever fully went away, but these ideas are surging because they are needed to rationalize barbarism, and they will keep surging unless there is a response that gets at the root of it. And until that hierarchy of humanity is confronted head on, right? This is why I feel like the idea that we just need to convince them that climate change is real, that's not, that we actually need to convince them that human beings have equal value. That is much more important, Or completely marginalize them.
It's a really profound point, and I think it's a really significant point. You're talking about these planetary arsonists, so Trump, Bolsonaro, and so on. What they have in common then is the sort of tendency to white supremacy, anti-immigration, exclusionary politics, anti-indigenous rights, and so on. You've also talked that they're all misogynists.
A lot of them are. They do seem to be. Yeah.
What do you make of that?
So I think what they represent is a certain, a dominance-based worldview, this intensely hierarchical worldview, a resurgence of that worldview. It is a reassuring worldview for people who feel insecure on multiple fronts. And it's a patriarchal worldview. And I think that there is, there was a moment about a month ago when Macron was going after Bolsonaro for not doing enough about the the Amazon fires. And Bolsonaro, who had previously said that the Amazon is our virgin, or the Amazon is like a pristine virgin, and all of these outsiders want to lay their hands on her, but she's our virgin, right? Then he attacks Macron's wife, right? Which I think...
For her appearance.
For her appearance, yeah, for her appearance. And I thought that that was quite revealing around the sort of, like that these things seem to go together, this sort of, this defiance around the right to endlessly extract from the natural world, which is, very, very strong in settler colonial countries. Not to say that it's not strong here because you guys invented it, but but I mean, I think in countries where and this is one of the things I write about in the book, like coming from Canada, it's sort of interesting. We were an extractive company before we were a country. We were the Hudson's Bay Company, right? And we were just selling beaver pelts to folks in Europe who liked those top hats made of beaver pelts. And we were just like, and our brand was endless nature, And, you think about what was happening with in this period that Europe is hitting its own ecological limits. And it is in its own ecological crisis and has felled most of its great forests, has killed its great game for the most part, is in an extinction crisis on various fronts. And then, comes the so-called New World. And even just thinking about, we'll call it New England, or we'll call it New France. It's a kind of a weird thing to name, a new country. Like, we just found a spare country, and it has tons of nature and will never run out. It's so huge. And so I think that endless depletion was built into the DNA of so many of these countries, and it's really, really programmed as like a core entitlement, and it's never been separable from white supremacy, because that is what cleared the land from indigenous people, and then it was the transatlantic slave trade which created the force to work that land, right? So it's always been about dominance, but I do think that the indigenous world views that were that were seen as the enemy in this process, in this colonial process, had a very different worldviews, and it was, these are all, every indigenous culture is different, but there are some common elements around respecting Mother Earth, respecting a web of life. And I think that there's sort of a rage in this project that is this sort of, it's anti-nature and it is anti-people seen as close to nature. Mm-hmm. So I think when we see that directed at indigenous people, we can understand it, but I think it's worth remembering that in that hierarchy of humanity, women are cast as being closer to nature. The natural world is cast as feminine, whether from mother to, tied up virgin. And so I think that that's why this is sort of a package deal, right? And that Trump, this is a guy who, had a beauty pageant and just graded women on their looks. I mean, it's pretty base stuff. And I do think that there's a shared, there are connections between these different domination-based logics. And I also think that that there's a way in which a worldview that is all about celebrating the sort of singular hero, self-made entrepreneur and so on, and this sort of denial of interconnection, of community, of the fact that none of us are self-made. We all come from someone's body. We all were dependent at some point in our life. There's a way in which I think that the misogyny of that insistence on the great individual, the great man, sort of has to hate women as a reminder of the lie of the singular self-made man. Maybe?
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And just in the final section of our evening, Naomi, I'd like to talk about the hour fire, your third fire, the most exciting fire. And I just wonder how you use, there are lots of people who aren't climate denialists, aren't far right, but perhaps feel a bit disengaged from politics or alienated by it, they feel powerless. They feel powerless to do anything to stop the climate crisis, and so have no idea what they can do. How do you reach people like that? Because we need to.
Yeah, we do. We need to. And I think that, I think we need to tell better stories about what the world could look like if we changed. I think we have a lot of work to do in breaking the association of climate action and killing jobs and not taking care of workers, because that has happened, right? There's a lot. Every working class community has had the experience of just being thrown on the trash heap of history, right? And we have abused communities that have relied on resource extraction. That's certainly true of mining communities in this country, right? So there's every reason to be suspicious that another transition is just going to be another way in which you're going to get shafted. And the other thing is that we have about a decade and a half of neoliberal climate policies that have offloaded the burden of responding to this crisis, however insufficient isn't a strong enough word, but almost symbolically. But the kinds of policies that have been passed have in some cases rightfully been associated with just increases in people's electricity bills, increases in gas bills. So, in times of economic insecurity, and we are in those times, right? It's just too much. And I think we saw this very clearly in France. What happens, right, when you layer climate, when Macron attacks trade unions, imposes economic austerity, gives tax breaks to millionaires and corporations, and says, oh, and by the way, my climate action is you working people are going to pay more for petrol. And so there's a reason why people feel like this is going to be all pain. And so there's a lot of work to be done in showing people that actually there are ways of responding to this crisis that can create really good jobs, that we're committed to protecting people's salaries and benefit levels, that there's ways of designing a new electricity system which is going to bring more resources to communities to pay for badly needed services. So we need leaders who are able to tell this story and paint a picture, but we also need examples in people's lived experiences. So it can't all be about national politics, right? I think we need to try to win it at the city level, especially in labor-controlled cities like London. There are big battles to be won over transit, and so I think it's also just that we are in a very siloed mindset. So we don't tend to think about how all of these issues could be connected, and we don't tend to think about a holistic vision for how we're going to connect healthcare and childcare, and this is what we tried to do with the video. So, but it can't be, it's not just the work of media; it's the work of actually people's lived realities and breaking that down.
policies
And politics. And maybe you're going to be in an election soon, and maybe we'll have that opportunity. I think the last time there was a general election in this country, we saw what can happen when people are shown policies that actually hold out the possibility of a better life. People got excited when they read Labor's manifesto, and I think that there's a chance now to do more to center the climate crisis and connect the dots between the many other crises people are facing. The slogan of the Gilets jaunes movement is, you care about the end of the world, we care about the end of the month. And to show people you don't have to choose, everybody has the right to care about both. We actually know that people do care about both, right? On some level, even if they're denying, everybody actually cares about the fact that our natural world is in crisis. And I've said this before, I think we can repress that, we can deny that, but we're not indifferent to it. I think people are numbed by chaos right now. And so I think some clarity, a vision, some practical hope would go a long way. But there is a vacuum that has opened up here, right? Because the center has collapsed. It's collapsed here, it's collapsed all over the world. And, I've said this before, but, if you have a vacuum, if we don't fill it with hope, somebody is going to fill it with hate. And we are seeing that happen. It is not notional. We are seeing how this vacuum is being filled with hate mongering, and it will get worse unless we are absolutely robust and filled with conviction about what a different future can look like, and seize on absolutely every opportunity to make that tangible. Like if a factory is closing, we need to stand with workers and argue for that factory to be turned into a cooperative to make green products. I mean, this is, there are examples of this happening around the world. So, we need that. We need national plans. We need international plans. But we can't just wait for that. Every single opening to show solidarity with people in pain, we need to seize it, and we need to enter into that space.
So we've got a few minutes left, and I've got some questions that have been submitted in advance from the audience. So just if you can ask a few of those. So this is from Dylan Dartnell-Steinberg. When I talk to my friends about the climate crisis, they say that the scale of the crisis means we need structural change. Therefore, individual efforts are not so important. I totally agree and understand this line of argument, but how do we think about it in a way that balances this big structural change argument whilst not shirking our individual responsibility? Yeah. How do we make sure we don't become disincentivized to act?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I don't agree that it's an either or. I think that, part of what we're up against is the fear-mongering that if we were to take this crisis seriously, we'd be thrown back into the dark ages or hemp bivouacs or whatever the hell Boris Johnson said. What was the thing about the bivouacs? Crusty, I heard the crusty thing. But I mean, there's a very deliberate attempt to equate climate action with suffering, right?
And denial of
exactly.
pleasures.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that, when I think that the more in our lived experience we can realize that, in lots of cases it's going to make us healthier, and we may even improve our quality of life, the less scary that will be, the less effective that will be. But we also have to recognize that a lot of people don't have access to the tools they need to make good decisions, make good lifestyle decisions. They don't have good public transit, they're cut off. They live in food deserts without access to healthy food. So if we fetishize lifestyle, and it seems like you can't really care about climate change unless you have completely decarbonized your lifestyle. Yeah. I mean, not only will you have a pretty small movement, but you'll also have a really middle class and white movement, because most people are not in that situation. And so, That said, I don't think it's like we're only about fighting for the biggest picture policies. I think that there are lots of local work that we can do, organizing our coworkers, imagining what a Green New Deal would be in our sector, whether it's education or health, whatever it is, it needs to transform and completely decarbonize. And so the sooner people get together themselves and figure out how to do that in a way that's going to be most inspiring and really serve people's needs, and not wait for politicians to come down with their plans. I mean, what we need is we need politicians to have those big picture commitment targets, but what we actually need is for every workplace, every sector to design what a Green New Deal would mean for them. So there's lots of smaller scale work that we can start doing that is smaller than winning a Green New Deal on a national level, but bigger than recycling, And I think that the more we get out of the mindset that our greatest power is as consumers, and find other levers of power. That's what the student strikers are doing. They have found a lever of power. They're not going to school on Fridays, which is the one thing all students are supposed to do, is go to school. All kids are supposed to do it, and they are withholding their labor, right? And so I think we need to find those levers of power.
Great. The next question is from Usman Kawaja. Given the rise of populism in the Western world, how do you envisage the implementation of a Green New Deal taking place anytime soon?
Well, look, I think this is the answer to populism. I really do, because as I said, it explodes the idea that you have to choose between jobs and the environment, the idea that you have to choose between the end of the month and end of the world. You don't need to even care about climate change to be excited about a policy that is going to create millions of jobs and is going to bring better services to your community. And these investments, it is incredibly important to link, why is healthcare in the Green New Deal? It is in there because we are going to be facing shocks and crises together. And these are public health crises. I was in Puerto Rico after Maria, where, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, more people died than in 9/11. Somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 people died in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Maria. But it wasn't because of falling debris. It was because of crumbling infrastructure, including health infrastructure. The health system in Puerto Rico had been the subject of years of austerity attacks. It's particularly bad because it's a colonial territory of the United States. But this is what the healthcare system here has faced. And so you defund and you privatize, and they did the same thing to electricity, and then the wind blows and the whole thing breaks. And so what killed people, and this is what all the research shows, is that they weren't able to plug in their oxygen machines. They weren't able to plug in their dialysis machines. I mentioned I was in Paradise, California, where more than 80 people died. They were overwhelmingly elderly people and disabled people who were alone in their homes because we haven't invested in the infrastructure of care. The people who were in collective care, their lives were saved by nurses. Their lives were saved by care workers who risked their lives even as their own homes burned to save them. What kills people is isolation. What kills people is attacks on the infrastructure of care. And we are going to be facing more and more tests of our humanity. And the more we invest in that infrastructure, the more lives we will save, and the more we will save our own humanity, so that we won't have that feeling of so much scarcity and precarity that we'll turn on each other when people in need come to us, right?
Okay, so this question is from Laura Ford of Plastic Free Peckham. What gives you hope from humankind, if anything?
So I see a real sea change I see a real generational shift. And, I think that for the generation that came into adulthood after the 2008 financial crisis, there's a sense that this whole system is breaking down, and that's why there is more the climate crisis is the crisis that everything fits inside, but it's not the only crisis that this generation is facing. That they can't afford housing. They have enormous job precarity. They go online. They face white supremacy and misogyny, and on and on and on. And so I think the fear of change that our generation had, where we got the neoliberal hard sell. Like anybody who grew up in the 80s and 90s, it was like the war on the imagination and the sort of the true belief of the neoliberal project that this is the only possible future and equating it with progress and so on.
End of history.
They've stopped selling it. And now there's a whole, it still staggers around. It's a zombie ideology, but there's now a generation that didn't get the neoliberal hard sell, didn't get the same war waged on their imagination. They see the crisis and they're willing to dream. They're not afraid to dream. And so that it gives me so much hope that they, not that they're marching. We marched. It's that they're dreaming and they're not afraid of imagining a different future. Maybe no one told them history was over. They didn't get that memo. We got that memo, but no one told them. And so this is some of the debris that I think older people in the audience need to clear away, because I think those of us who grew up with the harder sell, with the ideological boundaries being more tightly policed, and are still afraid to say the word socialism, let alone eco-socialism. We need to clear away that that internal policing that comes from having lived a very ideologically policed life.
Mm-hmm. It's a similar question, but maybe have a slightly different answer, which is from Sophie Marple. Do you feel more or less hopeful than you did a year ago?
Honestly, both. I think the speed of the ecological unraveling terrifies me, and so things are moving faster. Just in 1 year, and so I can't just say, I feel more hopeful this year than last. Every year we lose we lose life that we don't get back. But like I said, I think that this is the first time, and I've been talking about the need for a Green New Deal now for a long time, and I'm not the only one. In the book, I quote Angelica Navarro, who's a wonderful Bolivian former climate negotiator for the government of Bolivia. And a decade ago, in 2009, she gave this amazing speech at the United Nations where she called for a Marshall Plan for planet Earth and laid out the building blocks of what a global Green New Deal could and should look like. The change is that we now have politicians, not governing politicians, but politicians who could conceivably govern in your country and the one I'm living in and the one I'm from, who are actually running on this, who are going to run on this. This is what the Labour Party is going to run on in the next election. And this is... So, yes, and I want to acknowledge that there are Green parties that have been talking about this for a long time. But we need to acknowledge that and appreciate that. And I do believe we have it in our grasp if we can lift ourselves up to this moment and be in it with all we have. We could actually have governments that make this policy, and then it would be our job to push them and hold them to it and to do all of that. But that was not on the agenda a year ago. So, that makes me hopeful.
So, we've got time just for one more question.
Yeah.
It sort of brings us back to our beginning of our conversation about the
Yeah.
emotional component of this issue. It's from Doreen Walton. How do you talk to your child about climate change? How involved do you allow him to be?
So I have a son and he's 7. And yeah. So I think I do talk, like I waited for as long as I could to talk to him about climate change. We talk about pollution, like we talk about things that are tangible, and maybe this is a lesson for adults too. He like the concept of like plastic in the ocean, or even a local power plant. Like they want to build a new gas-fired power plant near where we live, and he went to a protest and held a sign that said "Animals hate pollution." So he feels incredibly passionately about stopping pollution. Talking about a planetary scale crisis with a very small person is something I'm not sure is healthy for their growing brains. It's too much for a lot of adults. And so the fact is he lives with 2 people who work on this full time. And so it does seep in. And so we talk about the Green New Deal a lot. What can I say? We talk about how we're going to have a Green New Deal. I changed the subject to the Green New Deal when he wants to talk about climate change, because it's too big a crisis for someone that small, in my opinion, to have to carry. One thing I will say, the other thing I would say about kids generally, and we all have kids in our life who we love, whether or not we're parents or not. And I really feel strongly that parents don't have a monopoly on caring for the future. I had a kid at 42. I don't care more about the future than before I had a kid, because I had a kid. I just have less time and I'm more tired. And so I just want to be clear about that. But I think that you don't have to have one of your own to believe that children have a right to a future. And I don't just believe in it for my son. But I think for all the children that we love, it is, I think coming back to what I said about what got me was just falling in love with the natural world. So I think fighting for the right to nature, for the right of all kids, not just privileged kids, to have access to nature, is really important, because I think we fight for what we love, right? And so if the natural world becomes just associated with fear, right? If you're just learning, your first lessons about nature are about, oh my God, we're overheating the planet and we're going to have a future of serial disasters, then nature becomes equated with a place of terror. And so we have to remember that nature's not the terrorist. That we're the ones who dug up fossilized life and burned it and put it in the sky where it doesn't belong and put everything out of balance. We actually are lucky enough to live in a natural world to which our life is exquisitely adapted and that is exquisitely generous, and is just on a singular mission to regenerate life. And if we can help with that, with protecting those natural cycles of renewal instead of constantly extracting them, then we might just have a fighting chance. So yeah, the main thing I try to do is create opportunities to just fall in love with the natural world. And I think it's something that we all need to remember for ourselves in the rocky road ahead, that we need to do what it takes to keep us in this struggle, because it's the struggle of our lifetimes. It's not something we're going to win in a couple of years and then chill. So we have to figure out what's going to nourish us. And I think part of what nourishes us as mammals is remembering our connections to the rest of the rest of the living planet. And I think that will sustain us as we keep going. So, yeah. And the other thing I would just say about these kids out there doing these amazing things is we have to join them, you know? I mean, Greta, when she spoke at the UN, she said, "You stole my childhood." It was devastating. And I've talked to a lot of young people who feel that way about the activism that they're doing, that this isn't what they chose, this isn't what they want to be doing in their teen years. And they are devoting their recesses and their lunch hours and their evenings and their summer holidays trying to get us to wake up and join them. And so I think that we should see this as a challenge, that we have millions of young people in the streets, and they're giving up their childhoods to save life on Earth. And what are we willing to give up, you know? What are we willing to give up? Maybe some evenings, maybe some weekends. You know, maybe there are some retirees in this audience. Maybe you want to go get arrested. But maybe we all... I mean, everything is on the line. Everything is on the line. And so we have to be in it in a way that we haven't been before. We have to clear away the debris. We have to be on fire. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi Klein.